Welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, your host. Glad you could join me. And I think you'll be glad we will be joined by the grouse man himself, Steve Grossman, from the upper Midwest, Minnesota and South Dakota, and his son Travis. Both are pro guides. They have a hunting lodge in both states. We're talking all types of grouse with a particular emphasis on sharptails and ruffed grouse. Steve and Travis both will offer up some pro guide tips and tricks, some advice on dog handling and finding birds. These guys know their stuff, and I'll tell you, every time I talk with them, I learn something. So get ready for that. On our Fix It segment, some thoughts on introducing the electronic training collar to a very young dog. And our social media is all about testing season. Just curious to know if you do that sort of thing and why you do it. So that'll be all coming up this week on the Upland Nation podcast, made possible by Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, TrulockChokes tubes, Purina Pro Plan Sport dog food, Sage and Breaker gun care products, CableGangz tie-out systems, and Pointer shotguns. Well, I'm kind of in puppy mode and thinking about and going to our local NAVDA chapter annual meeting tomorrow. So thinking about all the things along those lines. It is testing season. And so I thought I'd see what you thought about all of that. Will you and your dog do any hunt tests, field trials, or other events? And got some great answers that might be motivational for you. Here's a great one. Robert Wagnon, done all of them. AKCs, feed trials, field trials, and NASTRA feed trials. I do a lot of those. Meet a lot of good people. Just me and my old bird dog, Val, that just turned 13. Good on you and Val, both, Robert. Philip Urban, planning on some AKC tests, entered in a NAVDA utility test. Good luck to both of you, Philip. Yeah, like many of us, that provides the goal for you to take your dog to the top level. Absolutely. Megan Dennis says, we love the fun with the dogs and camaraderie with friends. We do NAVDA hunt test field trials and even show lightly in confirmation. Well, good for you, and that's probably a good balance, too. By the way, if you haven't watched the movie Best in Show lately, you really ought to. We got a kick out of it a few nights ago. Hey, Megan has a dog going to the Invitational this year and one working on her dual championship. So congratulations. Yeah, I feel your pain, Megan. The problem is they're all fun and addicting. So no 12-step program yet. Sorry about that. Ben Waters says, wifey says, I do not need another hobby. Isn't that the truth? Let's see. This is somebody else's opinion about somebody else's opinion, but and it is basically those events don't bring out the best in a dog. I understand that. There's a lot of arguments for and against, but it depends on where you're going or what kind of a test you're in most of the time. We got some field trialers in here. Miles Burdett says, no, we do our own planted bird work during the off season, but overall, it's now fishing season. Can't blame you for that, Miles. Junior dogs being tested by Scott Veeder. Used to do NAVDA. Need to get back into it with them. Yeah, you do. Maybe I'll see you somewhere down the road. Mark Lawrence, running AKC and HRC next weekend and APLA in a few months. I think that's the American Pointing Labrador Association. Well, good on you and good-looking dog in the picture. Yeah, training for tests keeps the dog working and learning. And, of course, they love getting out, he says, and it's so true. John Salvesberg says, just to see how far I can go and have fun doing it with my dog. Absolutely. Harry Hill, it keeps me involved all year long. Yeah. David Dowers, NASTRA trials and possibly a versatile hunting dog federation test. That's another organization you might want to take a look at down the road, everybody, if you haven't yet. So bear them in mind as you look for new ways to essentially play with your dog all year. And that might be the best reason to do it right there. So anyway, thanks to everybody who contributed there. I only got to one of the pages there. There are some great answers on some of the other pages as well. But we will catch up with you and talk again soon on the social media. Some great questions there and already seeing some great answers. So get involved somewhere on social media with Wing Shooting USA or Scott Linden. Both of those will work for you. Even Upland Nation has a page. So see you on all of those. And that portion of the program brought to you by pointershotguns.com. Yeah, I've been playing around a lot with this new Field Tech 912 over and under. Very impressed. And so are the trade magazines, and so was everybody at the SHOT Show. The fit and finish are superb. You can get the receiver in nickel or blued, and the price, just a little over $700 for your new over and under gun. Yeah, if you're looking to upgrade from something else into the over and under world, that's a great way to start. I think you'll be very impressed with the gun, how it shoots, how it lasts, and how it looks. It's available now at dealers including Bass Pro, Sportsman's Warehouse, Cabela's, Turner's Outdoorsman, and all sorts of independent gun stores around the country. Go to pointershotguns.com for more information. And sageandbreaker.com just got a nice big purchase from me, restocking everything I used all season, running low on just about everything. And, for me, as well as training season, it's sporting clay season. So I'll be doing more of that. We'll need more of their great products from their CLP, which is a spray-on that does everything from clean to lubricate and protect your shotgun, to their firearms grease. And some of the cleaning tools they have available are the best in the business. Their version of that bore cleaner, it's a modular system, so you can get as aggressive or as gentle as you want to be. And remember, if you can only order directly from the company, and that's what you do at sageandbreaker.com, it's a sign the company wants a relationship so they can offer you the best service and support. And that likely means they trust and back their products 100%. Sign up for the mailing list at sageandbreaker.com, and you will be the first to hear about future sales and new products at sageandbreaker.com. Well, I'm welcoming back one, and I am welcoming for the first time another. Yeah, there are now two Grossman Grousemen. Travis is the son and Steve is the dad. These guys know their insides and outs about sharp-tailed grouse and ruffed grouse in particular. Yeah, in fact, they're guiding in both those areas, and always enjoy talking with Steve. I'm sure the same will be true for Travis. Welcome to the program, guys.
Thanks. This is great to be able to have Travis on board with us. This will be fun.
Yeah, I think so. And Travis, welcome to the program. Nice to have you on board for a change. Thank you.
I'm glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it will. And I'm sure we'll learn something about all those birds and maybe some others as well. So, Steve, as the guy who made it all happen to begin with, why don't you give us a little bit of background on your operation and where you are, for example?
Well, we started the Grouse Lodge in 1987. Prior to that, we had started a game farm in 84. And in 87, I had been training for Burnt Creek setters. And the English setters we had started pointing the rough grouse and woodcock at the farm at Little Moran with greater consistency than my other dogs did. And so all of a sudden it grew from that point on. And it was kind of interesting. One of our first setters was a dog named Shiner that was a gift to Travis and to Josh, my other son. And so they grew up with Shiner as a gift from Burnt Creek Setters when they were little, and they all kind of worked out hand in hand. But so we started in '87 with the Grouse Lodge, and then in 2010 I was invited to work at a lodge out by Gettysburg, South Dakota, and that was my start with the sharp tail and prairie chickens and Huns out in the Western Dakota. So. Everything we're very fortunate, and to be able to do what we're doing is I like to get up to go to work each day. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? I mean, I tell people, I play with dogs all day.
Yep.
And I can't think of a better way to do it.
So life is good. And, the thing is, they don't last forever, but each day you get out with them, they give you their best. And, so you embrace it and you take it, and it's like we had a story done a number of years ago that Mike Gaddis had done called The All-Time Greats of Little Moran and the 5 greatest grouse dogs over a 30-year period and what made those dogs great. And, it's like anything else. They brought something different to the table, and so we are lucky to be able to have dogs in our life like that. So no question.
Absolutely. Travis, where do you fit into this whole scheme of things?
Well, I grew up training dogs with Dad, and it really started with the game farm. I think I was 9 when I got my first chocolate lab, and it wasn't long after, and I was guiding pheasant hunters. And then later on, ended up getting setters of my own, and jumped back into the business once I wrapped up college and guided a lot for about 15 years, and then recently taken a few steps back just as the age of my kids and other work needs. I'm the director of a camp that really focuses on outdoor education. So I'm using those skills and kind of get to do both side by side now, just at little different levels.
I bet. And I can only imagine how much you learned working with your dad that whole time. If you had to think of one aspect of all of that, dog handling, bird hunting, etc., that you learned from Steve, what do you think would bubble to the top?
I immediately go to his statement early on when I was guiding, where he just said, "You know what? If your dogs are doing well, other people are going to tell me the stories," and that really stuck with me. Not just in that category, but my whole professional life.
Yeah, that is. There's probably a couple variations on that, but I love that idea, and it's absolutely true. Well, let's start with the important stuff. How was your hunting season, Steve?
We had South Dakota was good. We had a good season. It wasn't quite as warm. We did have a few days that we got us out of the covers and called it an early day, but we had good bird numbers, and the thing about it was nice was a lot of young birds. And the last few years, across the board, our bird numbers have been good, and a lot of young birds. We're shooting very few old birds, which makes it difficult for when these guys come in and they want a taxidermy bird, a nice big bird for put on the wall or on the mantle, and it's nice to have plenty of opportunities, but the old birds are slipping through, and the young birds are the ones that we're taking. But South Dakota was good. Minnesota was poor.
Yeah.
And it was. I think it was in pockets and spotty, and even with the last couple of years, our woodcock numbers they've been okay, but they have declined. There's no question about that. We're still moving plenty of woodcock and giving our guys plenty of opportunities, but it's not like it was here a few years ago. And I just saw on social media that the woodcock up in that Cape May, New Jersey area really took it hard with that snow and ice storm that came through a week, 10 days ago. And they were finding a lot of woodcock frozen and emaciated that just didn't make it through the storm. So that's alarming, but overall it was good. We had some good dog work and great clients. And, it's like anything else, is your clients make the whole hunt. And with really good people, it makes it easy.
You mentioned something that's really interesting, and it is sorry that the woodcock population got so hammered, but on the sharptail side especially, you said you shot a lot of young birds. Are you saying that there weren't as many older birds, or were they just too smart for people like me?
Well, the older birds, that's where a good dog comes in, and they'll cross the T's and dot the I's for you that way. But the whole thing was that the younger birds were more user friendly for dogs, and even forgiving for a little bit of younger dog work. And so those are the birds that that the hunters are taking. When we get into a pasture or we get a brood going, typically it's a brood of the year and a young brood. And so the old birds are, they're either going out the sides or it's not their first rodeo. So, they're the young birds were just more the low-hanging fruit for all our guys, and that really is kind of how it works out.
Yeah, the same out west here. We saw the same thing in a lot of places. People were complaining that, for example, chucker and quail numbers were down, and they probably were because last year was a stellar year. But at the end of the day, they'd say, we shot all young birds. Where are all the old birds? Well, they're still there, but we're just not catching them as easily as the young ones. Travis, go ahead.
No, I was just going to follow up on that and say that in Minnesota, we had very few young birds or birds of the year that we took.
Yeah.
Most of our birds were old birds, which is defeating because it tells you we didn't have much of a hatch.
Yeah.
So, with a lot of young birds, besides the old birds going into the breeding stock for the next year. But so, that's the difficult thing is when you're shooting just old birds and pickings get pretty skinny. So and towards the end of the year, and I ended up right up to the last day. You wonder if you should actually even be shooting birds out of those smaller coveys. Absolutely.
In my case, they're not at any risk, but people I'm with, it's a little bit of an ethical question. Travis, how about yourself? How was your bird year?
Really, really echoing what Dad was just saying. I did not spend significant time out west. Luckily, I know a hell of a dog handler who took my boys out west for September, and had them in tip top shape for the grouse season. But it was just a really challenging year. I think when you have years like this, I hear a lot of folks saying, "Gosh, well, I'm finding some birds where they aren't supposed to be." In similar things, and I think it's the path that we're taking, as reaching further, and it's Dad has related many times to hunting it like fishing a depth chart. Well, if you're not finding them in 10 feet of water, you better move to 15, and then you stumble across these random. So overall, I did find it interesting that, really old birds, for the most part, that they're hard to build a young bird dog with.
Oh yeah.
When you've got lower numbers, and the ones that are there are tricky. But it's fun to see some of the veterans come alive, and you feel good about those well-handled birds. And, we're going to be out hunting, regardless of the numbers. And so it's just one of those years we have to go through the low spots to recognize the high spots.
Yeah, it's funny. In the fishing world, when I was working in that a little bit more deeply, some of the pro guides would have all sorts of tricks for a slow day that involved everything from, and I have a L.L. Bean handbook for guides back in the 20s, I think. It says when the clients are bored, take them out and let them pan for gold or let them snare rabbits. Or, all these tricks to keep people from going crazy and being mad at their guide. I don't think you're doing any gold panning out there, but Steve, what do you tell a client when their expectations don't meet reality?
Well, the first thing we start out in is if we're hunting, especially in weather out west in the prairie or in Minnesota, if we're hunting typical habitat or habitat where birds should be found, when the hunters will say to me is, I can't believe we're not finding any birds in this cover, just because it's such a nice cover. There's plenty of food. There's plenty of overhead cover. We may be at 9,500 stems to the acre instead of 10,000 stems, so it's not quite as thick that way. But it's in habitat and cover that people feel good about, that there should be birds here. But in the same sense is if we're not moving birds, and like Travis had mentioned, I am one of those that I'll keep trying different things, and I'll move to more mature habitat, or I'll work swamp edges, or I'll work a willow clump or something different just to mix it up during the day. And if it's not working in the young aspen stand, then we're going to move around. And the best thing and the most fortunate thing for us is we've got so many return hunters who've been with us for years that their feelings are is if you're not finding birds, then the birds just aren't here. And I think in some instances the birds themselves have evolved. I think they're doing things different. Those that have survived through all these low times, they're running from danger more and then flushing further out in front of the gun.
Yeah.
In different things along those lines. But for the most part, we understand we're hunting wild birds, and this is not any more throw down birds or not anything liberated. We're hunting wild birds, and you take the good with the bad, and that you don't always shoot par when you're, and so we're lucky that our hunters don't give us any grief when it comes to bird numbers or things along that line. They just understand it.
Yeah, and you are blessed in that regard, absolutely. And that's a reflection of how great an operation you run and how you basically set the guardrails, among other things. Yeah, you said something that was really interesting. I've been in this game a long time, not on the rough grouse side as much, for sure, but 20 years ago, I never heard about a rough grouse running out from under a point. Is that a phenomenon, or I'm just not in the loop?
I think the birds have evolved to that.
Yeah,
we have again, if it's a young bird or birds that are low hanging fruit that are easy pickings, they're not going to survive, so they're not the breeders for the following year. But those that survive, they're the ones that are breeding, and if they are doing things in a different manner, or have learned or have evolved to do things different, to run out from under a point and not be as like an old dumb chicken, the woods chicken of the woods. It's changed a lot.
Yeah,
and I think an interesting deal, and Travis can discuss this. So we had the 2010 or 2011 English Cocker National Championships were held at the farm at Little Moran. And what we were always wanting to do was to hunt cockers with really well-mannered cockers with the setters and pointers in the grouse woods, and to see how we could get those birds in the air. And Trav was out with one of the former national champions, and he can fill you in more on what took place in that hunt. And it was very interesting.
Well, I'm intrigued because everybody entertains the notion of pairing a flusher with a setter. And then they realize what a commitment that is on everybody's part. But Travis, tell me all about that, because it is intriguing to me.
Yeah, so I've had a couple of experiences with that, and I think first of all, I'm keep on saying I'm Steve Grossman's son, so my dogs are steady and well mannered, and I think that's a big chunk of it, and I would say that had a truck full of dogs to kind of choose the best pairing in that. I really do think that that's important so that there's not a competitive edge or a loss of control when you're in that situation.
Yeah.
But I found it really interesting. I think that there were some advantages. The first advantage, the biggest advantage, I would say, is frankly the wounded and dead bird retrieval. My dogs do a fair job of that, but it's not their primary. We're talking setters and pointers. So it was phenomenal for that. It was really great at getting the bird in the air. I think that there's a whole nother learning curve to really trying to anticipate and put yourself in the best place before sending that cocker when you've got a gun in your hand. And just from grouse are going to find an escape route, and you can position yourself perfectly and they're going to still put a tree between you and them. However, I did find it interesting when you have, I think that it's an advantage that a lot of guys who like to hunt rough grouse with flushing dogs will commit to, is now you're putting another piece in the puzzle where you've got a pursuing flushing dog that is going after the bird rather than holding steady. I think when you've got a dog that's well mannered, they're holding point. When we're guiding, we're getting everybody positioned, and then we're walking out ahead of the dog. I think that bird is focused on the guys with the guns.
Yeah.
When you've got a flushing dog, pursuing that bird, their first threat is that dog. And so I do think that it created a handful of opportunities that might have ended up in better shots. But it takes a lot of pieces to work together to make it successful.
Well, that might be the understatement of the day so far, Travis. But you're absolutely right, and it does change your mindset a little bit as well. But I think largely for the better. You mentioned going beyond a typical habitat when the birds aren't where you thought they were. And I'm thinking of some places I hunted this year for chukars in particular. And then some stories I heard. I'll never forget that story. Somebody, another pro guide said, we were way up there in that place and chukars were coming out of there, and it was pine trees. They were finding chukars in the pine forest. And you wonder about that. But what about you guys? When you went beyond your usual spots, Steve, you mentioned a few things, a clump of aspens or what I'll call older growth forests. What other kinds of alternative habitats would a rough grouse hunter want to look at that they may not have bothered with, except that they aren't encountering a lot of birds?
Well, we hunt a lot of pine trees. The shooting in the pine trees is very difficult because you imagine in the early fall with all the foliage, with the pine trees don't give you much for any shooting lanes.
Yeah.
However, there are times we do find birds, that get in the pine trees. So again, it's kind of it's a mix of habitat. And an interesting deal years ago, I had a guy that he would track all my walking, and at the end of the day, we would put it up online and how we would work a particular cover. And the whole comment was, this whole thing, all you did is work edges. And so they like that edge cover.
Sure.
Like on a logging road or a tote road, for example, if you walk from the logging road into the cover, the first 10 feet from the logging road into the cover is very thick and sometimes thicker than once you get in the cover, deeper into the cover, because the sunlight reaches that floor and more things can grow. So, I'm a big one with food. They all need to eat. And so if I'm in an area where we've got a lot of gray dogwood early in the year, or there's thorn apple, the thing with rough grouse in that capacity is they use the whole forest as their buffet.
Yeah.
They eat mushrooms and greens and aspen buds and catkins and a variety of different things. On the prairie, they still, especially with the sharp-tail, we catch them early in the morning, the sharp-tail and the prairie chicken. And in many instances, they are combined when we end up moving birds in a pasture or on a prairie, where if it's a brood of birds get up, it may be a mix of a few sharp-tail and some prairie chicken. So they're in there in those areas, and it's really based on food. They're looking for food. And we've talked about this in the past about rose hips, winterberry, snowberry. Food is the key. So it's a little bit different working in the prairie that way, because you can't see it from the outside as you drive by a pasture or prairie where the rose hips and things might be, but the draws and the plum thickets, and they become a destination, a place that we want to check.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is the Upland Nation podcast, by the way. That's Steve Grossman. His son Travis is also with us. We're going to carry on this conversation and maybe focus a little more on prairie birds as well, because I'm selfish. But that'll be coming up after a quick break. So stick around. We'll also have that Fix It segment I was talking about, where we talk about the introduction to e-collars with a very young dog. So that'll be with us right after a quick break. So you guys on the other end, hang loose as I talk about Pro Plan Sport dog food. It's the brand that fuels the most sporting champions. And that was reinforced again to me at Pheasant Fest, where so many of the pros that I deal with in one way or another are stopping by the Purina booth because they got friends there, they appreciate the science behind the nutrition, and they know it works. And one of the most important things I was looking at on the bag as I was pouring more into Flick's feed bin, and it reminded me how important it is to concentrate the nutrition so that you can optimize oxygen metabolism. In other words, in a distance runner, they call it VO2 max. That's how you increase your dog's endurance during exercise. Of course, you can learn more about all the science behind all the formulations. Just go to ProPlansport.com. And my good friend Scott Trulock wants to remind all of you of some of the things that are important, especially in this day and age. If you are looking to kind of keep things here on the shores of the great United States of America, you couldn't do better than to buy TrulockChokes. Learn more about how to identify which ones are appropriate for you. Go to TrulockChokes.com. And then remember, they are made with American steel in an American factory right there in Whigham, Georgia. Now, if you're a side-by-side owner, let me remind you one more time. If you don't want to kind of affect the aesthetics of your gun, but you'd like to put in some great TrulockChokes, remember that if you find an extended choke in their assortment that you like, Scott Trulock will make them especially for you in a flush choke version at no extra charge. Learn more about what they have and how to get your hands on a set of TrulockChokes. Go to TrulockChokes.com. Hopefully they were taking notes the whole time, not going out for coffee or anything. I hope Steve Grossman and Travis Grossman are still there here on the Upland Nation podcast. Welcome back, guys. I got to tell you, I don't do as much of it as I can, but I ended my season with a spectacular Hungarian partridge hunt. I know. Do you ever go out specifically for hunts? Well, I got a spot with a friend. Thank you, Felton, if you're listening. But you guys are out there on the prairie a lot more than me. And Steve, you talked about particularly prairie chicken hunting out there. And I've found them in with sharpies a few times, especially in South Dakota. But the whole game of prairie hunting is so different for so many people. What's your initial advice from each of you guys about somebody who's maybe going out to a prairie state for prairie grouse for the first time?
when I first started years and years ago, I started up in North Dakota shooting sharptail and hunting sharptail. And it was predominantly around shelter belts and where they had even some overhead cover, Russian olive trees. You'd see a tree off in the distance and you would just beeline to that tree. That was a destination because there was always birds near that. And once I got started down here in South Dakota, I had to kind of change my ways on that. But I still am one that likes to try to find an edge of some sort because it's a change in habitat, and birds seem to like that. It started if you get the chance to watch birds fly into a pasture or into the prairie, see where they land. And most times I'm watching birds as they come into a pasture, into the prairie. They may not land right in a plum thicket or a patch of snowberry or buffalo berry, but they land close to it. And then they have a tendency to either walk into the cover or they hang around that because especially in the early season when the heat gets bad, they like to stay cool.
Yeah.
So then that gives them a little bit of overhead cover and a little shade, which gives them, it helps keep them cool during the day. And so those are some things that I look for. If I'm driving, looking at prairie, you'll come across some pastures and some prairie areas that it speaks to you. It begs for you to jump out and hunt it because it looks that good. And so they like to change it. I like draws and coulees. Those kinds of things are awful important. So an interesting thing is I've got one pasture that I was going to that I've yet to move a sharptail in. It's 100% prairie chicken, and that pasture there are no pockets of any kind of cover like that. There's a nice draw, and I think in some instances, if a person was to have the ability to go out in the springtime and watch them dance on their blooming grounds or on their leks, they're territorial to some degree in that, even though they may fly miles, but that's still kind of a home base for them. And so those are areas that I'll mark on my calendar and my plot book, and I'll give those a good run each fall.
It's funny you bring that up because I was thinking, as you were saying that, about a couple hunts I had this year where shot a bird in a place that I wouldn't expect a bird to be, and I'd look around and try to figure out why the heck they were there. And I think sometimes they're just passing through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Travis,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, what do you think about all that?
I agree with it all. I think, specifically about Huns, as soon as we start talking about them, I get pretty excited. I think that they're the ultimate, they are where you find them bird.
Yeah.
And it's really fun. The folks that have an advantage are the ones that really get to know a piece of ground and how many coveys might be using it. But I think, they are where you find them, but you certainly know to hit those fence rows. You certainly are never going to drive past an old homestead with good looking cover around it that you can get into. And so I do enjoy that. And they're, what a great bird. That's a mix in when you're on a Western trip.
Yeah.
But I think, I was going to chip in a little bit when Dad was talking about the, moving deeper, or some of those fringe edges. And I think they're an edge bird. And when we were talking about grouse, and then you brought up patterns, yeah, sometimes they're passing through. And I think sometimes we're not always looking, hard enough for the pattern. And I think that it's especially true when you're somebody who kind of takes a trip, the third weekend of September every year, or the third weekend of October, whatever that may be. The conditions aren't always the same. And I think in the rough grouse woods, there's years that maybe last year you found a bunch of birds, and this year you're not finding many, but the ferns are still standing this year, where last year they had already been frozen and fallen down. And the same thing can go for different conditions on your trips or crop rotations. And so, sometimes we need to accept that, yeah, that was just a floater. I don't know why it was here. if you find two of them like that, you better start taking notes and building out those plans and plan Bs for next year.
Yeah, good advice from somebody who's been there and done that. Absolutely. It's funny. An edge is a relative term as well, and yes, we see it a little bit more clearly in some cases. The grouse woods are a perfect example, but out on the prairie, whatever the bird is, the edge may be tall grass next to short grass, or a little bit more rocky ground, for example. Do you talk about Huns? I have been surprised by Huns. I've been walking through a covey on point because I'm a little colorblind, and it was so rocky, I couldn't figure out why they would stay there. Are there other definitions of edge for you guys? Steve, you see, and think about this season. And where was that edge that you didn't even think was an edge until I just brought it up now?
Well, even in a clear cut, in the grouse woods, where you have a clear cut where the old mature timber comes up to the clear cut, that's created an edge.
Yeah.
The edge along a slough bottom or a grassy area. And oftentimes what will end up happening, the grouse will squirt out into that grass, and they may be out there 20, 30, 40 yards or more in the grass, just like a prairie bird would be. They've found that becomes an escape. An interesting thing was, in my opinion, is when we had the game farm, when we would get a fresh load of pheasants that came into the flight pens, one person could go up there and catch all the birds you needed for about the first week.
Uh-huh.
After that, even the pen-reared birds started avoiding the pinch points or the areas where they were going to be collected or where they couldn't get away.
Yeah.
And so if the pen-reared bird is figuring that out, how many times does it take a wild bird in order to, because if they've survived through the spring from predators and things, they've already been chased by numerous things. So they've already established some kind of an escape route or escape pattern. And Travis is right. I mean, there's areas where you end up putting things together that they're in this area for what reason and that reason, but about the edges, even like you had mentioned in the prairie, when the habitat changes from short grass to whether it's a prairie dog town, I don't like getting near prairie dog town due to rattlesnakes, but it gives you an idea of where that edge in the habitat, that break in the habitat comes into play.
Absolutely. Travis, over the course of your guiding career, what have been some of the things about birds or dogs that has surprised you? Let me give you one example. I get an email from somebody, and he says, do you know what these are? He sends me a picture. You know what these are? And I said, yeah, I think I do. Why? Well, they were in a chucker crop, and they are pine nuts. And I mentioned the pine forest earlier where he found them. But what about surprises like that for you, Travis? Have you run into anything you've never read about it, nobody's ever told you about it, because you discovered it?
Yeah. I've had similar in the crop of grouse with, what are they moving to why are they in that place, right? And you check their crops. But I think, my time guiding, it's always been, and I think it always will be, really dog focused.
Yeah.
The birds, they're up and down, and you get to, you learn a lot organically while you're out there, as long as you're being mindful. I think that's maybe the most important thing. You're gonna draw those patterns, but I think watching, for me, it's really been watching a really special bird dog mature and get the game figured out, and the impact that makes, and also the ways I think that they develop differently as a guide dog versus your gun dog. And so I guess I'm breaking it up into a couple pieces, but I think for me, it's really been watching a dog develop into knowing when a particular situation or bird can handle some more pressure for them to pin it, versus a dog that that, might recognize conditions that changed in the day, and hey, I'm going to really keep my distance today. And, I believe in that. I believe that the dogs, they have enough experience that they figure those things out. And even just the ability of a dog to, it's one thing for you take a dog onto the prairie and they learn that I'm going to go hit these marks that I can see at a distance.
Yeah.
And, they're looking for objectives. And I think one of the most fascinating things for me in the grouse woods has been the way that the dogs identify objectives that they can't see. I think that they're using, the way the moisture, what smell is maybe consistent with where I find birds. And it really, those types of things, that's my philosophy. And I think that those types of things really, really separate the dog that is going to go out and make something happen every time they're on the ground versus the dog that you need to lead to birds, and then they'll point them and do fine. So that's been fun.
Yeah, it has. Hey, I wrote a whole book called "What the Dogs Taught Me," mm-hmm. And you mentioned mindfulness, and one of the things I made sure I put in that book was, do you really watch your dog, and could you watch your dog more and in a better way? Maybe mm-hmm. thinking about what that dog is thinking, and I don't know how many people do that. But Steve, what have think about it? Maybe the list is too long left to do an entire podcast on it. But what is one thing your dogs have taught you about bird hunting?
I think Travis hit on it. I think that there's times where I've had some great dogs, and when you put them in the cover, it's one of those things where you know they're going to find birds. It's just a matter of when. And if they don't find them, they're going to start looking bigger and going deeper and finding birds. But I think when you get into areas where if you're in a swamp edge, and I talk swamp edges a lot because I live there, you can smell the rotting leaves and things of that nature. And so when a dog has consistently found birds in an area where they remember certain things, I think that's a big part of it, that they'll start searching for those areas. It's kind of like if a dog, you find some dogs that get hit by a porcupine, and one dog may get hit once and leave it, where other dogs, it becomes a vendetta.
Oh, yeah.
So then they'll go hunting porcupines. So they get some of those things in their mind, and I think that becomes the deal. You had mentioned one, and it was probably the greatest butt chewing that I've ever had in the most polite way. This was close to 30 years ago. I had some of my very best clients come in a week later than what they had been coming in years past. And at that time, Pro Plan had just come onto the scene, and it was great that I had the opportunity to work with Pro Plan for a number of years. Long story short, my dogs hit the wall when my clients came in to hunt, and I had scabbed a few my training dogs, local training dogs, in order to have dogs to put in the field for my very good clients.
Sure.
At the end of the hunt, they asked me to come into the cabin and have a bump with them, which never happens because we always have a bump down at the lodge with happy hour. So, of course, my flags went up, and I walked in there, and they poured me a bump and sat me down, and they all stood around me.
Oh,
and
boy.
These were all CEOs and directors. And these are some heavy hitters. And they said the first thing was, Steve, we're coming back next year. Then the next statement was, however, if we experience this kind of dog work, which we're not accustomed to, when we leave next year, we won't have this conversation and we won't ever come back. And so it sure set me on my heels. And even though at that time I was feeding Purina High Pro, which was very popular food at the time, back 30 some years ago. And when I had that conversation with those guys, I called one of the gals I was working with down in St. Louis, and I explained my situation, and the following year, she had me, so we're going to get you on the pro plan. I did. And the same 6 dogs made it through the entire season. I changed nothing. And it was just simply because of the quality of the food they're getting and the digestibility of the food at the end of the day. I think that's the big thing, is when the dogs are tired and they eat only a little bit, but they still get plenty out of the food they're eating. So when you made that comment about the Purina commercial, that sure brought that memory back to me full time.
Well, now I'm going to have to send part of my Purina check to you, Steve.
No, you take it. You use it where it's best for you.
Oh, I will.
That was such a turning point for me and my dogs. It was huge. In your case, it's your living, so you got to be careful about that. And I'm glad you learned quickly. You guys do something that not many people do, and that is they take their dogs from, chronologically from the prairie to the forest. And, some of the testing groups watch for dogs who can adjust to, thicker cover and that sort of thing. Do you guys do anything special to get your dogs accustomed to running big in South Dakota and then running small in Minnesota? Go ahead, Trav.
Yeah, so I think that we typically have the philosophy that we're not trying to hold them back.
Yeah.
And the dogs, their adaptability and their ability to understand the program is higher than I think a lot of people might give them credit for.
Yeah. So
I think that it's really about what are we encouraging in any situation. If I'm calling to the dog in the grouse woods, they're recognizing that I want them in a different place. And I would also argue that, if your dog, what are your goals with your dog? If you want a dog that is going to have steady manners and be the dog that you can trust, in our case, we're trusting that dog to get our clients up there of varying abilities. And so if the dog that you want is that steady dog, we're not too worried about it getting too far away in the grouse woods, so to speak. It's going to bring us to the birds. And so everybody's too far away is different, but I do sometimes, I think that it's interesting. A lot of people with their pointing dog, they really want it where they can see them in the woods, and that might be 20 or 30 yards. And so we operate a little bit differently with that. We're trusting our dogs to go bring us into birds that we otherwise are not going to intercept just by walking.
Yeah. And
a lot of times, talking about that mindfulness and discovery, the spot that you didn't think was going to be good when you checked out an aerial on a forest cover, and your dog takes you 200 yards, and you go in there and kind of find the mecca, and you start putting some pieces together that way. So it's to everybody's liking how they want to manage their dogs or handle their dogs, but we let them roll.
Yeah, and they're smart enough and well-bred enough to make those decisions on their own, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I would also say that as what type of trainer are you, and does the dog become adaptable and understand that you're going to ask them for different things at different times?
Yeah.
And the way you communicate that to them, and I just think that they really figure out the program, and it's nice to have some depth with your dogs, because
sure.
In our case, again, if you're with a client who is not going to appreciate a dog pointing a grouse 200 yards away, and it's going to take you too long to get there to be effective, you're going to put a different dog on the ground.
I get it. I was relating a similar story to somebody not a week ago, and you have to be the guy who figures that out. Speaking of figuring things out, Travis, you are now associated with Camp Confidence. Give us a quick summary of what that is and why you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you. So Confidence Learning Center, or Camp Confidence, we're a outdoor recreational camp for people with cognitive and developmental disability. And so, it's been I'm here because of what we did at the farm, and we entertained volunteers, or we hosted volunteers of this organization, and that's where I became connected with it. And I think my love for this organization grew so much because, I grew up giving people exceptional outdoor experiences, and I could see what that meant to them. And I've taken a couple of really incredible adventures myself to Alaska, and what we do here is we give people an opportunity to have that level of an adventure, relative to their environment. Sure. And they carry that with them, and it's very special. And we don't do any funding through the government, state or federal, and we're donor driven, and so it's been a fun tie-in for me.
And how do we learn more about your operation? Yeah,
I would love that. So campconfidence.com. It's an easy one to remember.
I'll say.
And check us out.
Will do. Steve, you truly are a guru in your world, and well respected for any number of reasons, and all well deserved. If you're going to leave us with one bit of advice, and let's make it about rough grouse hunting. If you wanted to, if in 25 words or less you had to tell somebody something that would really help them be a better grouse hunter, can you distill it down to that?
I think the number one thing would be to get an understanding of what habitat looks like. And as you're driving through the forested areas looking for habitat, to be able to recognize that and to recognize the habitat. I think, recognizing food and looking for food sources, those are all things. But I think in many ways, and with a lot of people, I've turned them on to hunting more mature cover. And I think oftentimes that mature habitat gets overlooked because it's not textbook habitat, but it still holds plenty of birds.
That's part and parcel to some of the other things we've talked about, and one that we haven't that is right in there as well, and that is if you're not finding enough birds, keep walking. And maybe you walk into some of that.
Boots and walking is what's going to be that's what's going to get you into birds. So it's, the interesting thing over all these years in where we hunt, the comments that the hunters will say is each step could produce a bird, because we're working in such good habitat, and it's all around you, that each step literally could produce a bird. So you just keep walking and you're at the ready, and they're always going to burn you, whether it's a prairie bird or a grouse bird is when you let your guard down and you think, oh, nothing's in here, and all of a sudden you get caught with your britches down, and there you go, and watch them fly away, or you can't get your fumble with your safety, or a variety of things. But the whole thing is to get out and enjoy the sport, and and learn from it. If this isn't working, what wasn't working? What kind of habitat was I in, and different things along those lines. But to enjoy the sport and to get out with family and your sons and daughters and dogs, and the most fortunate thing that we have are our hunters are here for more than just taking a bird. They're here for the complete picture, and it makes it easier for the hunters, for the guides, and it's just not all about taking a life and killing a bird.
Can't top that. Words to live by. That's Steve Grousman, Grossman, Travis Grossman. Probably got to you're still working on earning the Grousman title, Travis. But I'm sure you will. Great to talk with both of you. If we want more information, then we are going to go to what website?
TheGrouseLodge.com.
There you go. Guys, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending some time with all of us. Have a great week, and talk with you again down the road. Thanks again.
All the best, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Back at you. Bye-bye. And the rest of you, I'm kind of kind of in the mood to explore young dog topics. Maybe I'll have some news for you on that. That'll be coming up in the Fix It segment, introducing an e-collar to a young dog. After this, from Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, you know, Browning has a lot of great models in the shotgun world, and midvalleyclays.com is where you can find a lot of them. Yeah, they're a full-service operation, instruction, fun clay target games, and then an incredible gun room with a lot of hard-to-find Browning models and gauges. Now, Dave Fiedler is building up a library of field-grade guns just for hunters like us. Obviously, you can use them on a sporting clays course as well, and I do. When I'm shooting the same guns as I do in the field, and if you are looking for one, particularly a sub-gauge gun, then you need to start at midvalleyclays.com. Get the phone number and call Dave. Tell him what you're looking for. If he doesn't have it, he'll probably be able to find it. Learn more about the entire assortment of shotguns and instructional services. And then if you're in Western Oregon, stop by and play a game or two or maybe three. Fix It this week is kind of an ounce of prevention instead of a pound of cure down the road. The pro trainers have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm echoing a lot of their thoughts. And this is not meant to be a comprehensive guide to introducing a young dog to a training collar. But here are some observations that during this puppy season you might want to keep in mind as a starting point, if nothing else. First off, whatever you're doing and however you're using that e-collar, do it gradually. Everything's got to be in baby steps. Everything from the setting on the collar to how frequently or how long your training sessions go. Another thing that I've found helpful to me is figuring out when a little dog's body can actually carry an e-collar comfortably. That's part of the whole conditioning process, and it may be a lot later in their life than you think. And then there's the whole aspect of when are they ready to take the stimulation you're going to offer. So keep that in mind. Obviously, if you're collar conditioning, you're going to keep it turned off for quite a while and just let the dog wear it around the house and the yard here and there for an hour or two or something like that. Once you do start using it, great advice from another pro trainer way back. Yeah, snug it up, not too snug, just so that the prongs remain in contact with the skin and not directly over the esophagus. You can turn that collar just a little bit so it's on the side of his neck, so that you're not doing any damage to the esophagus too. All right, my last bit of advice on the e-collars thing is these days most of them have some sort of a vibration feature that might be a much better alternative than even the lowest stimulation setting. Bear that in mind and overlay all your commands on the collar for quite a while. Start in the yard and on a leash to ensure compliance and safety. And learn more about this topic and more at findbirdhuntingspots.com. Well, thank you to Steve and Travis Grossman for all that advice, insights. I hope you learned as much as I did. If you want to learn more about their operation, whether it's South Dakota or Upper Minnesota, go to thegrouselodge.com. If you, please, will leave a rating or a review at Apple Podcasts, I would sure appreciate it. And then, speaking of appreciation, our sponsors make this all possible. Thank you to Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, TrulockChokes Tubes, Pointer Shotguns, Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, CableGangz Stakeout Systems. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Scott Linden. We'll see you at the range.